Hello and welcome everybody. My name is Zoe Dill. I'm a manager in the Learning and Community Department at Hart House, and this event is part of Hart House's Black Futures programming. I want to thank you so much. We have a really great crowd. I've lost count now, and I think we're close to 80 people who have signed on, so thank you so much for joining us for this second round of discussions around the future of Black and Indigenous futurisms. So we started this conversation last year, and I'm really honored and thankful to have both of our moderators return, who moderated last year, to pick up the threads of that conversation and to explore it and investigate Black and Indigenous futurisms even more with our host of tonight's guests. So you'll hear a little bit more about those guests later on. And I want to recognize and thank everyone, particularly our guests, our moderators, and of course, all of you. I don't want to say too much about the context of this conversation because I think our moderators are going to do a great job in setting the table for that in a moment when they speak. But I do just want to share a quote that I saw in an Instagram post from an opinion piece from Blavity, which is a great site, and I'll put it in the chat. You should follow them on Instagram. And I thought it was really timely that this popped up yesterday. And the quote is this: "And still, we keep going. Black and Indigenous people alike are drawing on the strengths of community to get their brothers and sisters through the pandemic. Indigenous people and Black people are on the same side of history, the right side of history. We are extracting ourselves from the colonizer's way of thinking and finding our own balance and liberation based on the values that have always guided our ancestors." So I was just struck by that quote and thought it was a nice way to sort of lead into tonight's conversation. So before I hand off to our next speaker from the Hart House Student Art Committee, who will do the land acknowledgement and say a few words about the Art Committee and what it does, I just want to remind everybody that this is a shared virtual space that we're in at the moment. And in this shared virtual space, we seek to build community and inclusivity in a safe and respectful way where all are welcome and where I hope we are all open to the knowledge exchange that we'll be hearing tonight. At the end of the discussions, we'll have about an hour and a bit for the discussion. We'll have a couple of poll questions that we ask you, and then we'll be able to get into, share some of the comments and the questions that you have. I'm not sure if we had a slide about putting questions in the Q&A, but unfortunately we don't have the Q&A function. So just put your questions/comments in the chat. We'll be looking through those and trying to pull out as many of them as we can get to. So tonight we're scheduled for 2 hours, but I want to be mindful. We definitely won't go over 2 hours, but I also want to just sort of be mindful of the flow and the organic nature of the conversation. So if it ends up being that, you know, we end 10 minutes early, then and that's the right time, then guess what? You've all found an extra 10 minutes. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Vinicio, one of the student representatives of the Hart House Student Art Committee, to take us through the land acknowledgement and share a little bit of information about the Art Committee. Vinicio?
Hi, I hope you can hear me. Yeah? Okay, good. Thank you. So, hi everyone. My name is Vinicio, and I'm the marketing co-chair for the Hart House Student Art Committee. The committee was founded in 1922 by a group of art-loving students who wish to leave their mark on the university. And today it continues to be a student-run committee of contemporary art enthusiasts. Oh, okay, made up of 4 subcommittees: acquisitions, education and outreach, student projects, and the Arbor Room. And we facilitate the intersection between University of Toronto students and the local art community, be it by curating the walls of Hart House, organizing field trips to local galleries or art studios, acquiring new work for the Hart House, and sharing the bounties of the Art Museum's collections on our social media. So with that said, I would like to acknowledge the land on which the University of Toronto operates. For more than 15,000 years, It has been the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee, the Métis, and the Mississaugas of the New Credit First Nation. And as an Indigenous immigrant myself, stemming from the Yaqui in northern Mexico, and for whom it is an immense privilege to be on this land, I recognize its significance, its sacredness, and I'm thankful to have the opportunity to live and work on this Indigenous land. And I'm gonna pass it over to Kaya Edwards, or Kaya Edwards, who's the Vice President. Yep.
We wish to acknowledge the labor of our African ancestors and the many contributions they made and continue to make in creating our current space in this country and across borders. During Black History Month and beyond, we want to be mindful of the lineage and sacrifice of African bodies in the struggle for racial and social justice. We take this moment as an opportunity to pause, reflect, and educate ourselves on Black excellence, particularly as it relates to the arts. We uphold our support and relationship building with our Indigenous community and look forward to reimagining our shared futurisms. Okay, and now I would like to introduce our co-moderators, Dr. Audrey Hudson and Dr. Karen Recollet. Audrey Hudson is an artist, educator, researcher, and futurist. Audrey is on the leadership team at the Art Gallery of Ontario, where she is the Richard and Elizabeth Curry Chief Education and Programming and teaches Black Canadian Studies at the University of Toronto. Karen Recollet is an assistant professor in the Women and Gender Studies Institute at the University of Toronto. Karen is an urban Cree and explores the various intersections of Indigenous artistic activations rooted in the multiple layered Indigenous territories that are urban spaces. And yeah, I'd like to give it over to the moderators now. Take it away.
Thank you, Acacia. Hi, Karen.
Hi, Audrey. How are you?
Good. How are you? Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us here on the screen. Thank you for the invitation. Of course, thank you to our panelists who are going to join us. Thank you to my sister, Karen Recollet here. We've got a great conversation planned for you this afternoon. So.
Yeah, we're super excited. We've been looking forward to this event and working alongside the visionaries of this evening. We're very grateful to Hart House, and we're very grateful for the panelists that are the artists that are coming to talk to us tonight. It's so exciting. My heart is so full. I'd like to also, acknowledge, all of the histories, the radical thought traditions that have inspired this moment, that have inspired the work of the artists that we're going to be engaged in conversation with today. It's very exciting, and it is a continuation of a conversation that's been had for generations of futurists, right, who have been, I think about like treaty as speculative imaginaries of the future, and thinking through like all of these deep commitments to the future that so many generations of Black communities, Indigenous communities, Afro-Indigenous communities that have held space for all these imaginings for so long. And we're just really grateful for those ancestors for doing that for us so that we can have this conversation tonight.
Mm-hmm. And just a tiny little bit about me, a little bit more about me. So I'm a treaty person. I view myself as, living, creating, loving here on Indigenous land in the Dish with One Spoon treaty. And I see myself as an arrivant after Kamal Brathwaite, who named that term to really kind of concrete how the way that Black people were on this land, or came to this land that we call Turtle Island, and so I see myself as arriving, not settling, but arriving. So coming to this land in different ways than we all, we all have our different ways of coming to this land, but that's how I am identifying. And so, coming to this conversation, we, as Zoe was saying, we had this conversation a year ago. It was a different world that we were in a year ago than we are in today. And so just acknowledging that. And we came together, we had this really fulsome conversation and, you know, thinking about the future, thinking about what the future holds. And I think this is just, it's just such a ripe time for all of us as Black and Indigenous folks to be thinking together and how we can forge ourselves even further into the future than, you know, anything anyone could possibly imagine. And I love the, you know, Karen talks about kinsalatory and kin in the making, you know, and taking up that kind of language around the relationship between Black and Indigenous folks. It's more than an allyship. It really is. We are together. We are meshed in some way, not only our pain, but in our resilience, our resistance, and our revival. So we're trying to bring a working understanding of different forms of artistic creation with the panelists that we have today. And we're just taking a moment to set us up, just to give a bit more of a background of where this panel, like there's a narrative behind the panel and a narrative behind how we are working together. And, you know, this year, thinking about how we went back to school, we witnessed in the summer, we witnessed 8 minutes and 46 seconds of the death of a Black man by the hands of police. And so how can we go back to school? How can we go back to, how could I was thinking personally, how can I go teach a class on Black Canadian studies without acknowledging that, without doing something different? So thinking about love lettering, thinking about care, this radical care that I am thinking with and that I wanted to enact in my syllabus. Maybe something, you know, that we, you know, as instructors or profs, like maybe we don't enact radical care. Maybe we don't put that love and that care, but I wanted to this time in a more intentional way than I have ever before. And so I took a moment to pause and took a moment to really think about what was I going to give back to my community, to Black communities that were suffering? What was I going to give back to Indigenous folks that are, you know, out there on the front lines, like every day, just fighting for land back, really, you know, and fighting for clean water. Like, how simple is that? But what was I going to do in this very, you know, this ivory tower of an institution that that I was teaching within? So what was I going to do? And so part of it was thinking about my inspiration, and Karen and I have written about, you know, Cyrus Marcus Ware's love lettering. Cyrus wrote activist love letters, and so I took that up in my class, and I asked my students, I'm like, we're going to write love letters to Black Canadians, folks in the Black community, and we're going to send them. We did. We sent 31 letters out to the Black community. This was my way of thinking about care, thinking about relationship, thinking about building together. And I got 31 responses back. Everyone that we sent to, some of you may even be on this call, but you know, some of the folks that we sent to were there was just such a gratitude. It's like, oh, you see me. Like, that being seen is so important, I think, for our communities, and listening and hearing what a student has to, how you've influenced a student's life, and how you are giving, like, that really, like, concrete, like, example of how your work has influenced another. So that was a really wonderful project that I took on, and really quite emotional, I think, and filled with a lot of care and love from myself and the students. So thank you, Cyrus, for that project and that inspiration.
I also feel like, you know, like in introducing ourselves to you as well, like I'd like to, you know, mention that, you know, I'm a Cree urban Indigenous person who has experienced dislocation. You know, I'm a survivor of the 60s scoop. My family's come from the waters of the North Saskatchewan River, which puts me in relationship with some of you that are joining this call, and I'm so glad that you're here. You know, I come from the Ermine family and also the Felix family in Saskatchewan, and I'm thinking about, you know, embodying the space of diasporic Indigenous movement and the ways in which I interact with the worlds around me. So yeah, we've been thinking a lot about, you know, how do we lean into these sets of relationships? And I recently had this beautiful conversation with my colleague, Melanie Newton, where we were thinking through this together and wondering, you know, how do we lean into sets of relationships, and how do we land into relation with land and with each other within a diasporic space, but also without needing to claim each other's stories as our own. to acknowledge the deep histories and the deep ruptures, and also the deep love and the deep organizing and the mutual aid and all of these beautiful things that are futuristic practices. So as I lean into thinking alongside Cyrus's work, the amazing, brilliant thinker and activist and artist that Cyrus is, I was thinking about, like, what do love letters activate? What do they do? And I started thinking through, like, really providing the language and the vocabulary for the shapes of our gatherings, and describing how we move together within these spaces, and sometimes very fraught spaces, right? Excuse me. And then I began to think about, like, how do we create kin within these very fraught spaces of a toxic settler state atmospheric? Kinship then becomes this space-making technology. And love letters allows us to embrace other forms of movement, other forms of embodiment that perhaps takes vulnerability into gestures of falling into different sets of relationships, or leaning closely into each other's atmospherics in consensual ways, following radical relational protocols so that we don't need to feel like we need to claim each other's stories. Love letters require us to think critically in stillness, in passion, to refuse the violent natures of Western anti-Black, anti-Indigenous love that deny our humanity, such as containing us in carceral configurations. So I look to this work that we're going to be exploring today as digging, as wielding, as collaging, as writing, as quilting, as painting, and imagining sort of otherwise gestures as we lean into these sets of relationships. And also, Audrey, I was thinking about a conversation last year too, when we were talking about, like, the desire to continue this conversation and to continue maybe thinking about, like, the speculative architecture of a space, a refuge, a desirous space of possibility, a placemaking practice to house these conversations, to house these love letters, as though we are archiving the world beginning itself anew. So what are these evocations, these provocations, the enunciations, the gestures, the images that we can touch, that we can begin again with? So, so excited. And so honored to be a part of this conversation, specifically during this very sacred time of, acknowledging and thinking closely with radical Black traditions around love, and it's important. So yeah, I'm really excited about this.
And I think, how we are, the way that in which we are taking it up through this centering or there's many centers, I think, but maybe art as really the nucleus that brings us all together, brings us through a creation, and through, our ancestors got us here. And, they came with art. Like, we all have that art, but, we can't forget that. It's not new. It's not something anyone can take either from any of us. And so really trying to thinking about that, thinking about bell hooks. So when we talk about, that radical care, and as Black women, as women of color, as people, I think in general too. And I saw in the chat, I will just acknowledge, like I did say, I named one person. I named George Floyd as the person, but unfortunately, there's a list previous to Floyd and then after. So I see in the chat 1 year anniversary of the senseless killing of Ahmaud Arbery. So and we could go on and on in that list of names. Unfortunately, it's still happening. But we are here in the name of all those who are not here with us anymore. But we know that they're on our shoulders. They're with us in spirit. And so with that, we would like to listen to our panelists. Can you show yourselves? We've got Lisa Jackson. We have, there we go. There's Stephanie Chrisman. There's Young Yummy. All right. So we would like to take a moment to have each panelist introduce themselves, and perhaps, I guess it's difficult on Zoom. So I'll just say, maybe Stephanie, if you, just in the order of appearance on my screen. Yeah, maybe Stephanie could take the first lead.
Sure. My name is Stephanie Chrisman. I am an Afrofuturist writer, amateur Octavia Butler scholar. I haven't got any accolades for that. I'm just a little guy. And I'm excited to talk a lot about the ways in which Afrofuturists and Indigenous futurists share a common unique history with white supremacy, with colonization, that many other people of color do not share. Now, that doesn't mean that there hasn't been oppression of other people of color, but I think that we share a very, very unique history that I'm often curious as to why we aren't more connected to one another than we have been in the past. And it seems as if we are moving towards a really wonderful connection with one another. So I'm excited to talk about those pieces, and also to talk about the ways in which Afrofuturism has enhanced my life and continues to lend itself to the types of writing that I'm interested in reading, the types of writing that I'm interested in doing. So I'm looking forward to having a conversation today.
Thank you. And part of that was, thinking about, tell us what excites you. What are you working on right now that is exciting? Your thought experiments that you've been delving into or are hoping to. So thank you for sharing.
Yeah.
Lisa is next on my screen.
Hi, I'm Lisa Jackson. I'm coming to you from Toronto. And I am mixed Anishinaabe from Aamjiwnaang near Sarnia, Ontario, and mixed settler on my father's side. And I grew up in Toronto, in Parkdale, and as well in Vancouver, very urban, from the inner city to everywhere. And I'm a filmmaker and artist. So my work is mostly film, largely documentary, but a little bit of everything, including virtual reality, an IMAX film on Lichen, and I guess a multimedia installation. So basically, I'll probably come up with something else next, because that's the way I do things. But anyway, it's a real honor to be here and to be invited and to share this space with you all, and really looking forward to the conversation. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you. And Yemi?
My name's Yemi Adekbazan. I'm an Afrofuturist visual artist here in Toronto, and very, very grateful for the invitation to be here and hold this space with you all. And I guess I'm really excited about talking or exploring different ways of sort of reclaiming identity, remembering ancestral identity and using that as a sort of a guide in terms of moving forward and sort of raising vibrational. This is a vibrational state of our communities. It's a very poignant moment in time. A lot of a very heightened sense of awareness, I think, around cultural identities, but also a heightened sense of anxiety, stemming from, the global pandemic, this sort of new civil rights movement that is, transpiring all around us, and yeah, I think in all of this chaos, we need to find ways to sort of center ourselves, ground ourselves, and I think for all of us are looking at what our ancestors had to say will play a central role in that. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
Audrey, would you like me to ask the first question?
Yes, I think yes.
Okay.
Great.
So so we kind of lightly curated a conversation open to happenings and detours and other thought experiments that maybe that will emerge in this conversation. But firstly, we wanted to just open it up to think about, like, relationality with more than human or other than human kinships, to kind of think through what are those kind of kin-making technologies that you and your respective practices activate in the futures that you're activating in these moments. So the question is, can you maybe describe to us what within your thought experiments are you like super excited about in terms of like thinking alongside kinship and kinships with these more than human beings, and how you interact with these technologies, how you activate these technologies of kinship. One example could be like, how do we have relations with oils and metals that have been used in such like extractive ways, and that we're now kind of forming relational spheres alongside. So yeah, so how do you what are you excited about in terms of kin making and kin making technologies in your work? Lisa? Yeah.
I'll jump in with a couple of thoughts that are pretty specific, but hopefully you enjoy them. I'm going to, right now I'm pretty inspired by sturgeon, the fish, as well as stars and meteorites. So this is extremely specific, but maybe offers some insight into how I relate to more than human as an artist in my work, and also layers of time. And so I'm just gonna riff around a little bit. And I might also include lichen in there. So I made a short film about lichen, the stuff that grows on rocks and kind of anything. And lichen is this incredible life form that is an algae and a fungus that live together, and science cannot decide whether it's one organism or two, because they're so deeply intertwined, yet they retain their separateness. So it is a place where there's a bit of a fracture between how, the institutional science can name and quantify things and the reality of the living world. And so one of the reasons I was attracted to lichen was that it doesn't need, it can live on anything, but it doesn't actually need the earth. It can live in the air. It is self-sustaining, and it is one of the oldest organisms on the planet. It grows high up in the Himalayas. It can survive in outer space, interestingly, as far as futurisms. And so it can go into outer space and come back and still be alive, where its component individual two pieces would die in outer space. So it's got some really remarkable qualities. And if you Google, which I recommend you do, images of lichen, it has so much more richness, beauty, and diversity than you could ever possibly imagine. It's like remarkable. And the reason for that is that every single lichen engages with its exact place. And that includes lichen of a same type, could be growing on one side of a tree that gets a little bit more rainfall, and another side of a tree that gets less rainfall. And those two will look a little bit different based on which side of the tree that they grow on. And so in thinking about place and relationship, in my film, I talked to a lichenologist who's kind of a philosopher, scientist, and he claims, and I've really come to, and I won't go into my other two actually, so maybe they'll come back later because I don't want to take up too much time, but that lichen shows us a crystallization of place, but also time, because the very fact that lichen's form is so intertwined with its relationship to place, and its responses to place are kind of crystallized. He claims it gives us a different way to look at time. And so he talks about the idea that all of us, from lichen to humans, the past is the result of our motivations or our desires made manifest. And the future actually doesn't exist except as an intention of any living thing. Oh, I've gone really deep, right off the top. But so that you can think about there's a now that's predicated on an intention, and then the past, which would be the future, our imaginary, and then the past, which is the manifestation of those intentions. And Lichen, being so sensitive, gives us a real lesson in how to look at that. And I would say if we get there, there's similar ways of engaging with how stars create the elements that create everything. And as well, that sturgeon are these incredible creatures that have survived mass extinction events. And their resilience is unbelievable. So I find that this is, in my work, I'll maybe wrap up by saying, as someone who started off, my mother attended residential school for 10 years, and a lot of the colonial traumas have been really manifest in my life. That there's been, it's not a continuum by any stretch, but I have had a trajectory of sitting in the kind of apocalypse part of that generates futurisms, and then moving towards the imaginary and the possibilities of what the future could be. And so, but I don't see them as one to the other. I see them as deeply entwined. And I think one of the most transgressive things in a way that we can do is to recognize that these things relate to each other and resist the binary of the trauma versus the possibility. That's it.
Gorgeous, thank you.
So we supposed to follow that though. Okay. All right. Yemi, would you like to go next?
Sure,
I'm gonna let you follow that.
I'll jump in. I think one thing that I'm really inspired by is the concept of water. I guess water has a memory. Water contains a record of everything that's been dissolved in it, everything that's come in contact with it, and there's a lot of interesting theories about how the flow of water from one place to another can be traced over thousands of years. And I guess the inspiration, how that manifests in my work, the inspiration that I take from that is thinking of human bodies as consisting of mostly water, and what does that look like? Where does that water come from? What memories, what information is stored in the water, within our bodies? I'm not a scientist. I'm not here to suggest that there is a scientific link between the memories contained within water and and our own personal memories, but more as a metaphor. The concept of being able to tap into a body of knowledge or a body of memories that that have not necessarily occurred in our lifetime, but something that we still have access to, and circling back to sort of the concept of ancestors and what that means in our life today. I guess it's just sort of like a metaphor for being able to have a dialogue that exists across time. I really like what Lisa was saying about time. I'm also a big proponent of just challenging the concept of of time as this linear thing, this linear trajectory. That's a very contemporary idea in society, and I think like looking at throughout most of human history, most indigenous cultures around the world viewed time more as a cyclical thing, be it seasons or moon cycles or whatever, and if you lean into that, if you think of time as in more of a cyclical nature, what does that mean for, what does that mean for life in the present day? What does that mean if our ancestral history and our present moment and our future are stacked? They're all sitting on top of each other, instead of thinking of this thing of, this history that's way in the past, it's dead to us, and this, this holy grail sort of future that we're moving towards. I think that's it's a limiting perspective. I understand why we work with the linear time perspective, but I think it's just important, I guess, to keep jumping into the conversation and reminding ourselves that that's just one perspective. There's other ways of looking at it and measuring time. So yeah, that's I guess that's kind of where I'm coming from.
All right. Well, wow. Well, thank you for inviting me to this panel, because I'm not that deep. My relationship with I have so many thoughts in my head, but I'll try and bring it down. I think my relationship with what I think about in my own work around Afrofuturism is the ways in which technology can find a way for us to find our way back. I know we're supposed to be talking about the future, but for me, finding a way back to understand the past is so significant in making a way forward, right? And so I'm going to do a little bit of a spoiler alert for Assassin's Creed, which is a video game. I love video games, but one of the things about Assassin's Creed is that a young man is captured, and he is he comes from a family of spies. He's taken to this place where they take parts of his blood and look at the genes, and they use the memories in his genes to take him back, and he lives the life of his ancestor in order to achieve something. And I won't give it away, but it's been around for a few years, and I'm interested in that. I'm wondering how we have retained the memories of our ancestors, how we have and therefore how do we move through society with all of that trauma, with all of that joy, with all of that knowledge that is seemingly locked within us, and oftentimes expresses itself in ways that we aren't sure where it came from, right? And so and also I'm coming from it from a perspective of someone who is Black and also biracial. So thinking about that from a very an identity in which I have both experienced privilege as well as marginalization, right? Thinking about it from the perspective of someone whose ancestors, very close ancestors, came from the Great Migration from Mississippi and Alabama. So understanding that deep kind of roots and in a place that they decided never to go back to for a variety of reasons, and most of which were violent, right? And so I'm thinking about all of that stuff. And also as someone who is a Generation Xer, who grew up in the in-between space. I remember a time where there were ATMs. I remember a time when we didn't have cell phones. And yet I'm living in a space today where, and I grew up in a time where those things became a reality for us as a people. And then thinking about also, looking at the ways in which Black folk across the diaspora have used technology to become kin with one another, right? When we think about Black Twitter, right? Everyone knows about Black Twitter, and people hijack and take things from Black Twitter, and that is a wonderful anthropological space to look at the ways in which Blackness is there's some gatekeeping there, the way that Blackness is shared, the way that Blackness is faced with anti-Blackness within our own group, as well as from the outside. So for me, I am very much interested in the ways in which we will sort of engage with technology both within our bodies, as we maybe possibly take on technology within our bodies from a perspective of like a cyberpunk thought process, to the ways in which we can unlock the secrets and the mysteries of our ancestors through our own genes. And that would also take technology, right? So that's sort of where oftentimes my writing sort of takes me. And I'm really interested in the ways that we can utilize technology for good, and also the ways that we become obsessed with technology that can really create lack of kinship and separation. So that's a big jumble in my head. So that's what I'm thinking about.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing all of those really careful and thoughtful perspectives. It was interesting to me to ask the question about kinship and then move into a conversation around time. I learned a lot. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. And thank you. Each of you, spoke of time in a bit of a different way, living in that in-between spaces, Stephanie, and layers of time, Lisa, and then water as memory and time, Yemi. So thank you so much. But if we could think about this a little bit further, and you've touched on it in in the last response, but how does your practice contribute to Afrofuturism and or Indigenous futurities in your vision? How can we set a foundation for reimagining the future that positively views Indigenous and Black people, but maybe also complicates that relationship? We talk about the positivity, but there are complications to it. We can't, there's the polarities of every relationship. And so how does perhaps your work do that? Thinking about culture, identity, and you can speak to maybe methods that you embrace as you explore. Okay, so yeah, awkward screen moment again. So if we want to, if maybe, do we want to just go Lisa again? Like maybe we can keep that pattern, or if anyone or either want to jump in, it's fine.
I'll follow this time just because it's nice to follow the lead sometimes.
Great, yeah. Yemi, maybe? Or Stephanie?
Well,
Sure.
Okay, go ahead, Yemi. Go ahead.
Okay, I guess, Audrey, would you mind sort of just kind of giving me a little bit of a prompt here, rephrasing that question?
Yeah, it's really thinking about, like, we want to know more about your work. You've given, all three of you have given us a little bit of a, a glimmer. Maybe folks have seen some of your work as they checked out the bios, but this is, it's more of, okay, how does your practice contribute to Afrofuturism, point blank, and or Indigenous futurities? Like, what is it that, that says, oh, Yemi, why are you in my book? Why are you in our, our speculative fiction book, like with myself and Quentin, like what distinguishes you from another artist is that you're an Afrofuturist. You are taking up that work, taking up that thought and that methodology, that way of being in a way perhaps another artist isn't. So just maybe walk us through the process. You can even, you can tell us about actually like the actual process of making, whatever it is that all of you, each of you have your own specific craft. And so thinking of how you take that up.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that. I think, I guess the biggest thing for me is that sort of makes it futurism is a search for this sort of this decolonized mind state, or this decolonized space. I think the only space where that possibility exists is in the future, sort of, and the concept of space travel gets played with in my work a lot. The space and the galaxy being sort of like an analogy for that mind state, being like the only sort of realm that we can conceive of that hasn't yet been colonized, so I think you know, on a ideological level, that's where the work is coming from. And in terms of process, like I'm really interested in its assemblage. It's from a technical perspective, and from you know, again, from an ideological perspective, it's assemblage. It's drawing off different cultural and historical artifacts and mixing them with sort of contemporary imagery and also speculative imagery that's sort of being imagined, and trying to create sort of a synergy or a synthesis of those things. Again, in the form of a sort of speculative, fantastical sort of idea of what this could look like. What does a person look like that's in tune with their ancestral history, but also moving about the world in, you know, in a decolonized space, in a decolonized body. So those, it's like it's impossible sort of to realize those things in an actual way, but where, like, I think where the work is coming from is just trying to imagine that, and that's again, going back to the concept of like a decolonized mind state. That's what I'm drawing off of.
Great, thank you. And I also, you know, thinking about the space of Afrofuturism to think about decolonization, like I've been thinking about my actual decolonial fatigue and my turn to Afrofuturism, because I know that land should be returned to Indigenous people. It's like, okay, you know, so now it's like, okay, how am I going to think about that concept that I highly believe in, and then center art through the mix and through the kind of the melange of how we can kind of get there. And I mean, the celebratory nature in your work, yeah, I mean, like the joy I get when I see, it's like, oh yeah, like there we are, right? Like that, and that taking up space, and all three of you do that. Stephanie through written, Lisa through film, and Yemi through visual. But like that taking up and that ownership of space and that power, as someone that is appreciating the work, but as artists, I think you're moving through that space within Afrofuturism and Indigenous futurities as really placemaking. So thank you. And perhaps, and Stephanie, you wanted to go?
Sure. I think that part of my interest in futurist work is around the question of equity, right? I am an equity facilitator and consultant in my everyday life, and I challenge myself. I am challenged with the question of, is equity actually possible? One of the things that Octavia Butler wrote in her Xenogenesis trilogy was that, human beings have this destructive combination of intelligence and hierarchy. Because of these two things, one alone is great. Two together, they cause havoc. And so my question is always in my writing of whether we could achieve decolonization, could we achieve equity? I'm one of those people who is challenged by the and this is one of the things that me and my colleague Dr. Piazzi at the University of Wisconsin talk about all the time, is that whose land is it? And first of all, from her and I talking in terms of Indigenous understanding, they are the keepers and the mainstayers of the land. It doesn't belong to Indigenous people, right? And we can argue whether that is across the board or not, but from her perspective, that is what she was always taught, right? And I say, I agree. And also my ancestors' blood, who we didn't decide to come over here, is spilled on this land, right? So I'm thinking of from a purely US context, right? And so if we are going to talk about land, how are we going to talk about it? So that is also, part of the question that I often have, when we are talking about what would the future look like if we all got what we want, would it be equitable? And it is doubtful. It is doubtful. We all have desires, needs, and wants, and they will all not be solved, right? And so when I'm doing futurist work, it is truly about writing from the experience of what I believe to be my own, from my own Black experience around being raised in what W.B. Du Bois would call a talented 10th home, where we talked about how wonderful Blackness was. There was never a time where we didn't, love on Blackness and that kind of thing. And then also having then my world kind of blow up, where I was able to interact with folks who are Indigenous to say, like, what is the tension here between us? We have such a unique relationship to colonization and to white supremacy that we should have a synergistic relationship with one another. Why don't we? Is it because of the land? Is it because of blood? Is it because of, the ways in which the colonizer has made us believe things about one another, from stereotypes to all those things? And so when we begin to then kind of break some of that apart, my question is always comes back to, in my writing, is about equity. In a non-dystopian world, we would all get what we want, but we won't, because we are human beings who desire things, right? And so I think that when I am writing, I am always thinking from the question of equity. And then, you add in other identities, like I'm queer too. So, even when I'm reading books that are about Afrofuturists who are Black, I ask myself, where is the queer in Blackness? Just as I ask, when I read things from the golden age of science fiction, where is the Blackness in the whiteness, right? Those kinds of things. So it's very complicated to me in terms of how equity may lend itself to futurisms. But that's really the question that I'm always asking myself, is how would equity look in this particular society that I'm building? And someone is not going to have what they want. And what does that look like for them against the ruling class, whoever that may be?
Great, thank you. And Lisa?
Yeah, that's all great. It's super interesting. I could just listen to you guys. Yeah, I mean, some reflections, there's so many great threads kind of going in between all these conversations. What comes to mind too, some of the things that are echoing for me are, the idea of cycles versus linear, and the idea of the ancestry and the past, being a necessary part of future possibilities. And there's a lot of different ways I could go. Just let me think for a second. Yeah, so one of the things that comes to mind based on what you're just saying, Stephanie, is the idea, which I think is related to the cycles that you were talking about, is that, a lot of the elders that I've talked to, one of the things they lead with is the idea of humility, and that humans are not given to know everything about what is, right? We are part of. And from an Indigenous perspective, we are the most vulnerable and the most dependent of everything on this planet, and everything else can survive without us, and we need everything to survive. And so it's a radical reordering of responsibility and reciprocity. And so, one way it's been put to me is by Blackfoot elder Leroy Little Bear, is that, the cycles that we see, one of the reasons I'm fascinated by the stars right now is that I do love metaphors, as you probably figured from the early thing. I really love looking at the things that are and seeing, you know, reflections and teachings, I guess. And the stars have been a sort of map of the way the universe works, right? Or the way the laws of things. And those cycles of the seasons and the tides and deeply connected to water, of course, through the moon and tides and women and reproduction is something that in, you know, to generalize, in most cultures, especially indigenous cultures, is not taken for granted. There's a sense of responsibility, and much of ceremony is given to giving thanks for and making offerings towards the continued cycles, right? And so when I think about, you know, I do think futurism is about imagining an equitable future, and to some degree, you know, that's an ideal that we strive for, and we, you know, but I do feel that the balance, and this kind of gets to the linear thing you're talking about before too, like I've often felt like that enlightenment moment that, you know, said that our brains are incredible and what makes us uniquely human is this intellect and rational thought, was the beginning of, you know, our downfall, because we really shelved the other parts of our existence that actually connect us to our embodied experience in life, and therefore, you know, to the world. And I think has led us to a place of deep fear and sense of loss and disconnection. So, you know, my work, in as much as it's Indigenous futurist, I guess, has, one thing I could say about it is that I'm not a language speaker. I don't speak my mother's language, Anishinaabemowin, but she did until she was taken to residential school. And, you know, it was when I started looking at the qualities of, again, overgeneralizing, but many Indigenous languages are so radically different from European languages, English in particular, and they privilege things like process over objects, verbs over nouns. I typically won't come at the beginning of the sentence, as English kind of forces us to do. So in many Indigenous languages, it would be an object, verb, subject instead of subject, verb, object, which means I would say, I paddled my canoe down the river, rather than down the river, the canoe was being paddled by me. It's two very different ways. And the linear timeline, you know, we in English have to, it's called obligatory tense that we have to do in our verbs, which means we always have to say things are past, present, or future. It's not an option for us. It's wedded to the verb in every sentence. But there are Indigenous languages, and maybe beyond there, that I don't know about, that are called evidential. And this is interesting. So in evidential languages, you have a tense, but the tense delineates how you come to know what you're speaking of. And so, for example, if I say, she put down the cup, you will know by the way I use the verb tense, whether you saw that with your own eyes. If I saw that with my own eyes, if I saw evidence of it, but I didn't see it happen, if I saw it, but my judgment was impaired, these types of things. And what that does to hopscotch is that means that a timeline is is optional, right? So that's not the most important thing, that linear thing. That takes us, of course, to the perfect future once we figure everything out with our smart brains. But it actually centers our own lived experience as the most important truth. And I think this is one of the most radical things, because in our Euro-Western culture, we say that the highest truth is the encyclopedia, or it's Wikipedia, or it's the newspaper, or it's the Bible, but it's not necessarily your own lived experience, right? And so the centering of our own knowledge and direct experience is the highest truth that we can know, and the respect for other people as such, having that, I think, is a really important way that we can kind of recenter ourselves in the world. And I would say that in terms of my work, it kind of runs the gamut, but I think language has been really profound, and the way that languages emerge in a way from the people, that people live on the earth in a certain place, and the language that grows on that place kind of is, you can think of it as the earth expressing itself through the people living on her in that spot. And so there's a way in which I like to think of the language really connecting us to ancestry, and in a way those words and those voices become a continuum which we can tap into, and those ideas sit there, because that, I think that the ideas held within languages are is our ancestors, you know, and is a way that we connect to there.
That is super exciting in relationship to all that has been shared, you know, thinking through, like I'm looking at Yemi's work as well, and I'm thinking about Octavia Butler's processions, right? And I'm thinking alongside Lichen, which Lisa, you have me kind of obsessed with Lichen right now as well. And I'm thinking that this is sort of like the deep thought towards those layers, those like the adornments, Yemi, in your work are just incredible. Like there are these really detailed things to be worn, things to be adorned, almost like they come from another space time. And the assemblage is so fine and so thoughtful. I'm thinking about that in terms of Lichen and the speculative architecture of the Lichen, also in holding time in these really detailed curvatures. Octavia Butler's processions, you know, like the ways in which people move, you know, in dystopic times, like moving, you know, into visiting with other relations. Those details of detours, of futuristic movements are all so beautifully glyphed in your work, in your writing, in your thinking. Like it's really quite, I'm just getting shivers thinking about that, you know, the fine detailing in our future's prayers, our ancestors' prayers for the future were so finely glyphed, right? So finely detailed that it's beautiful. Which I'm wondering if I could move on to kind of skipping one question, because it makes me kind of think about like desire for the future, like, you know, thinking about design and architecture and speculative architectures and desire. So, you know, in Parable, for example, the procession, the movement, you know, the desire for movement, the gestures of futurity through choreography and moving. I'm thinking, Lisa, about your work in Digging Woman, right? Digging Woman, the desire, like what is she digging for? What is she searching for? What is the desire, right? And Yemi, in your work as well, like I see these beautiful, beautiful beings, right? Like, what is your desire in bringing them, offering up these ancestors? Can you talk about desire in your work?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I guess my desire is really, I think I touched on it a little bit earlier, just sort of raising that, the vibrational vibe of my community, of, you know, of people who identify with Black culture, of people who identify with the African diaspora. I think, you know, like mental and physical well-being are inherently tied to identity. I mean, that's a belief that I hold anyways. And I think for me, a lot of the adornment, a lot of the sacred adornment are intended to be sort of totems or visual cues, reminders that tie us into these different sort of these different histories, these different forms of ancestral wisdom. A phrase that I use a lot with with friends and people in my community is just this concept of tapping in. It's there. It's this body of this knowledge, this history, this identity, and a lot of the social constructs around us are designed to block us from that. Are designed to block that out from us. I think of well, anyways, yeah, there's a lot of things that are designed to separate us from that, and then just this concept of remembering that it's there and just kind of like tapping back into it. I think I've been really inspired by this concept, the will to adorn, stemming from Zora Neale Hurston's research, an early 20th century American sociologist. And that concept, she was speaking about language, I guess, when she coined the term, the tendency of in African American communities to sort of embellish language and to make things seem grand. And that concept has been since like sort of expanded upon and applied to hairstyles and and the adornment of fashion. If you look sort of across the board at African American culture, and I know I'm speaking as a African Canadian, but the reality is, like, for myself, growing up, and a lot of people in my community, we identified heavily with that same culture where we come from. We come out of that same culture, and yeah, just this idea, this concept of the will to adorn, it's defiant, it's space claiming, and it's just like a visual, it's just a very visual decolonization and resistance tactic. So that's really, for me, that's what it's about. That's what my desire is. I want to remind myself of that on a daily basis, and I want to remind my community of that on a daily basis. But but in a positive and uplifting way. It's just sort of just to shed some of this weight that comes with cultural identity. I don't want to downplay the significance of the traumas our communities have faced, and surviving those traumas, overcoming obstacles. It's incredibly important, but it comes with a tremendous amount of weight as well. And sometimes it's I guess sometimes it's just nice to remind ourselves that or to imagine what it would be like to move through the world just without carrying that weight, even if it's just for a moment, even if it's just for a brief point in time. Yeah, just to sort of step outside of that. And I guess the last thing I would tie that back into is just, again, into this concept of futurism being the only space where I can just imagine any of that being possible. So that's kind of my thing, is just like projecting forward and existing in this sort of this open realm.
Yeah, I love that when you were talking about the adornment piece, it really just brought me back to Black joy, right? And for me, when I think of my desire to continue to write, to continue to imagine futures in which Blackness is not the antithesis of joy, that Blackness is not just, as you would say, as you were just saying, living in trauma. that Blackness is full and 100% and unique, and it has its complications and all of those types of things. And really, like, for me, the biggest thing is, one, to continuously challenge myself in the question of equity, as I talked about before. I want to believe that we can have it all, and I am also, I think, in restrained to some extent by what I have learned of humanity in the 48 years I've been alive, right? And then also I want people in my community, I want young Black writers to see that there is joy in imagining worlds that at current do not exist, that there is joy in imagining family that stretches across generations, and that where you come from, and that they exist within you, and our ancestors are not just dust. They continuously exist within us, and are all around us. And so those are the two things when I think about like writing, that's where my desire is. And hopefully it kind of comes out in the writing itself. When I develop characters, I want them to be full of humanity. And I think that is the thing that we are sort of missing often in our real world, is that Blackness is not full of humanity. It is less than human in the ways in which we are viewed by media, the ways in which we are talked about, even sometimes the way in which we talk about ourselves. And so I want us to imagine, what would it be like if all our kids were Jaden and Willow, right? These kids who were raised with such Black joy, such freedom, such creativity. I remember thinking when they were little, like, how are they going to turn out? And, here's Jaden, giving water to Flint, and both of them being so intellectually, if you ever watch the Red Table Talk, and listen to Willow talk, and being so intellectually sound, and yet, she's still her age, right? But being able to raise children that see themselves as potential rather than, I could have potential, but here are the barriers. There are no barriers. You have little Blue Ivy saying, I ain't never seen a ceiling. That's what I want. I want Black people and Black kids to feel like that there is no limit, right? And so that's where, for me, desire comes in, paired with Black joy, that we can write ourselves into a world where we are whole, where we are 100%, regardless of what is happening around us. And so that's really where I think my work takes me.
Yes, all of that. Yes. like amen to that. Thank you, Stephanie. Yes. Yeah. Just yes to that. Such power, and almost a simplicity in what we're asking, yet it's not. We know the on the screen here, we know that it's not as easy as that imagining. And so perhaps maybe now we could and we've got a little bit of time left, and then we're going to open up the floor to questions, but to the audience. But maybe now, and I think that was a really great segue into thinking about love letters. We opened up with a love letter, and opened up with how we want to share, how we want our communities to be viewed, how we want our babies, right, to survive, how we want them to thrive, not only survive, but thrive, and how we want, like, what joys do we want them to have? What joys do we want to have? Those desires, those spaces that we're taking up, and that really positive energy, those vibrations that we've kind of garnered, and that we are taking and harnessing together. So perhaps we could think about, what does a love letter to the future look like? What does it look like for each of you through your work, or through, Stephanie, I think you that was it. That was your, you know, what does it taste like? What does it smell like? What does it feel like, sound like? What are the sonic elements of, you know, your love letters? We've kind of got from each of you, I think we've gotten a taste. And so maybe if you could share a little bit of what would the future look like? What would it be for, what would you want it to look like if you were going to write a love letter?
Oh, am I going first?
Yes, go for it. Yes, sure. Thank you.
Okay. All right.
You.
I was waiting on Lisa to jump in. First of all, I have never had a question like this. So as soon as I saw the question, it got my mind turning.
Good.
I was like, oh, what would it feel like? It would feel like Earth, Wind, and Fire September.
Yes.
It would taste like soul food.
Oh.
It would feel like Red Georgia Clay. You know, it would sound like hip hop and jazz and the blues and, you know, all of those things, you know, and it would have unique sounds that I've never heard because I'm not in the future and I don't know what's going to come out. You know, I don't think any of our ancestors could imagine the way that, you know, again, growing up in that in between, I remember a time when there was no hip hop, you know, and I remember the time when hip hop was growing, and now to see it become this international global thing, it's unbelievable. And it happened in the lifespan in the time of my life, right? And so I can't imagine what our futures would sound and taste like. But for me, if I could imagine those futures, that's my love letter, that we have, you know, a celebration, you know, around our traditions, that we have a celebration with our ancestors, and we connect through the music, through the media that we consume that gives us joy, right? Not the media that we consume that reminds us of pain. You know, we need that, but I think that I would love to feel more Black joy in the ways in which there are multiple ways of coming towards that joy, right? Yeah, so I love this. What would your love letter to the future look, feel, taste, sound like? And I feel like that's a piece that needs to be written.
Yes,
and I'm gonna take that on at some point. but that's what I'm thinking.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
I mean, you know, I feel like I love the elders. And I feel like when I don't know what the whole thing looks like, but I feel like one of the things that I kind of grieve, you know, in general, and grieve specifically, I think for, you know, communities where we lose people too young, and where we don't have time for those people, is those connections, like from elders to children. And I kind of lift up children on that too, right? Like that we make all the time for the elders and the children, and we have those connections. Because I think one of the things talking to the pain is that so much of that pain, I think, is those disconnections from, you know, those people who we are, you know, that is our birthright to kind of have those people around. And I'll slip in this a sturgeon star thing kind of elegantly all at the same time, which is that Wilfred Buck, who's a Cree star knowledge keeper and elder that I've been doing some work with, who lives in Winnipeg, he talks about Cree's sturgeon constellation that goes across the Milky Way and the teaching that goes along with it. And he talks about how that constellation, I think it's got 7 main stars. And so that middle star would be us. And then the 3 on either side are up to your great grandparent and your great grandchild. And that back in the day would have been how many people you might have known in your living life, you know, on the planet. And the Cree word for great grandparent or great grandchild is the same word, and that's chapan in Cree. And chapan means the ones that tie together. And so the idea is we live our lives such that, you know, what Arch Upon gave us back here and what we're going to give to Arch Upon down there, you know, we need to keep that chain strong. And so I would say my love letter to the future would keep those links, the ones that tie together, very strong. And so that we'd have the transmissions, which is the name of my installation. And the transmissions, I just wanted to mention too, because you were talking about tapping in, Yemi, and I was like super relate to that. And I'll just say that like this idea of the joy, I think of to creation, like the ability to create in and of itself is just such a act of love, right? It's an act of resistance. And one of the things I've thought about is it feels like such a slog sometimes getting through the trauma and getting to where we want to go. But the idea of tapping in is super profound. In my VR piece, there are these little glowing dust motes and they turn into language, some of them. And you know, what are those? Are they the ancestors' spirits? Is that the language that was spoken by our, we don't know. It's sort of, but the idea behind it was almost like electricity or, you know, Wi-Fi. It's right there, right? Like we can just tap in and those are like the transmissions. And so I feel like our ability to create and to connect with each other is our ability to tap into those transmissions, right? And that's like what's happening right here. That's like what happens with our ancestors and the children. And so finding that place of, you know, and that takes some courage and that takes some love to be able to manifest those connections. But I would say that would be it.
Amazing, thank you.
Love that. Yeah. I think, I guess my my love letter to the future would be, it would just be an encouragement to, I guess, to sort of, to embrace accessibility, to embrace accountability, and look at that as a pathway to ascension. Like I think in the accessibility piece, I think again, there are a lot of forces that sort of block us off from things, or you know, push us into spaces or deprive us of certain things. And this goes across the board. This goes across races and you know, down the different economic brackets and so on and so forth. And I would just like, I'd love to see those bridges open back up. You know, I'd love to see us be able to move, all of us be able to move through society with like a greater sense of ease, and to, you know, to be less, just to be less segregated. And in terms of accountability, I think, you know, I think I'll give an analogy, I guess, like on a base level. I think there's this concept, this idea of Mother Nature. We're all familiar with this idea of Mother Nature. And a while ago, I had a friend of mine put it to me that like just flipped it on me and said, what if you didn't think of nature as a mother? What if you thought of nature as a baby? If you thought of it as like baby nature, it would totally alter your relationship, I think, with the environment, with the world in general. I think I think the idea of a mother figure represents something that, you know, that loves us, but also, you know, I know I'm speaking for myself. I had some contentious moments with my mother growing up, and I think a lot of people can identify that. And it's also like an authoritative figure, so it's something that you feel okay with sort of pushing against. But you can't do that with a baby. You have to, you know, you just have to take care of it. You have to nurture it. And I think that's a view of accountability that I'd like more people to adopt. And I think if we, if we adopt that towards nature, we adopt that towards, our fellow humans, stop, like, I feel like if people didn't feel like they had to, they had to be in conflict, and they had to, they had to be forceful against everyone else, and it was more of an atmosphere of nurturing and taking care of. I think the future would be, a lot easier to exist in. And then, and lastly, the idea of ascension is just the idea that the hope, I guess, that there is like a possibility to, to vibrate higher, and to exist on a higher plane, to operate on a higher plane. It's very easy to get, bogged down with the sort of minutia and the anxieties and the frustrations of day-to-day life. But to just, I mean, again, this goes for everyone, just to hold on to that hope that that we do actually have the capability to operate on a higher level, to, just do better. I think it's important to at least hold on to that hope. Like, we may not get there, we might not see it in this lifetime, I don't know. But I think it's something that I hope that we can all keep striving for. So yeah, and I guess what would it feel like? It just feels like hot sunshine on your skin. And for me, I think it would taste like ocean water. I think that's just something that all of us have in our ancestral DNA. Is just that connection to water, to body, and to oceans. And so I think that's just the line that flows through it all. So yeah.
Thank you. Stunning. Thank you all, for for the conversation, for that last just imagining. And when I, like, as we were putting these questions together, really the intentionality of leaving folks with that, you've all three of you have given us a future, to look into, to take with us, I think, as we leave the screen, as we walk into the world, as we do better, hopefully, as folks, and as we come together over time.
So yeah, we just like to really, Audrey, like, our time together is kind of like falling out of grasp. And so I was just wanting to say a couple of things as well, just in gratitude for your generosity towards the artists, for, we're really thankful for your kinships, for those people that support and care for you. We are those people as well. And, what you're offering to us is all about these kind of like love letters, so these visions that help to ground us in the everyday. And, some of the takeaways that I have from this conversation is thinking about, like adornment, thinking through lichen, thinking through how do we think about future processions in ways that, we all can be in, thinking through some of the language gifts that you've gifted us with, and with the images and the symbols, the symbologies of ancestors, tapping in, like thinking through tapping in, and what are those landing glyphs? Like, how do we fall into a relation with each other? These landing glyphs are so beautifully sculpted, through language, through connections between elders and babies, like through adornment. These landing glyphs are so beautifully sculpted that you're participating in that through your words and through your imagery and the love that you bring forward into the future. So I can taste the future, I can feel it, I can sense it, I can hear the sonic layering in the future. And I'm just so grateful.
So there are, I think we probably have time for 2 questions. So I've got 2 questions here. So for the panelist, what advice might you give to those who want to become artists in a world that silences the voices of Indigenous, Black, and people of color? And anyone feel free to jump in on it.
Honestly, it's as simple and as difficult as this. Do it. It really is. I mean, in my daily life, I do, as I said before, equity and inclusion work, and people want all these complex answers to how do I do this? How do I do that? I'm like, read a book, step out of yourself, go talk to some people and build relationships with people who are not like you. Right. That's really all that's really all you need to do. Like, know yourselves, check on your biases, right? Work on that, read some books, and go make actual friendships with people who aren't like you. It's really as simple as that and as difficult as that, right? And so for me, it's like the more that we have the audacity as, you know, Black and Indigenous folks to get out there and tell our truth, the more that we have the numbers, the more that our voices get heard, right? It is difficult, and it is difficult to put yourself out there, but if you have a burning desire to do this, then do it. Now, the question is, do you want to live an artist's life? I can tell you that I know a bunch of artists who do just artist stuff. You got to be a hustler. You cannot sit around and wait for somebody to pick up your drawing and pay for it, or pick up your book and all of that. You can't do that. You have to be a hustler. So if you're not a hustler, that could be your thing on the side, you know, because the reality is that an artist's life, no matter who you are, is going to be a challenge because you have to sell you, right? But other than that, I say, if you have a voice, use it, you know, speak out, because we need those voices, because you're making a way for someone behind you, you know. All of us are that do this work. We're making a way for someone to look and say, you know, oh, you know, look at Yemi, look, you know, look at Lisa. You know what I'm saying? These are the people I want to follow behind, right? I mean, you know, for me, Octavia Butler showed me the way, right? I didn't know her personally or anything like that, but reading Kindred was the reason why I decided I wanted to write my book, right? And why I wanted to get an MFA, and why I wanted to continue to write, and why I believe in Afrofuturism and all of those things. So, you know, just do it. That's what I would say.
And I'll just add that I think small is okay as a place to start if you haven't started. And, you know, one of the things I look back when I was starting out, and too bad I didn't know it at the time, which was that, you know, I didn't know my ideas were good. Really didn't know that. It's taken a flying leap at first. And all your ideas, you know, I think one of the muscles you build as an artist is how to know what you want to grab onto, how to hear that piece and follow it. You know, it's like at first it's just it's always actually something that just drifts through your mind, and then you think, oh, that's worthwhile, right? But that's a muscle I think you have to build. So what I didn't have when I started out was the knowledge of when the idea was good and just go for it. But what I did have, which I miss now, is I had the time to nurture those ideas that I did have. I didn't have the courage to know if they're any good, but I had the time to nurture them. So I would say, you know, nurture those little things. And at first it can feel like silly almost, you know, like, listen to me, I'm talking about lichen and sturgeon, like I'm the weirdest, but it's you have to just, whatever your thing is, you just gotta know that it is valid and not look to others for that validation. Just make it and nurture it, put it out in the world. And for me, I will say personally, I had to go this far. The first time I made a film, I just said, if it's no good, no one will watch it. And I'm just going to hide it away and I'll try again, or I won't because I'll be too crushed. But that was the only way I could make the thing and not spiral into my own self-doubt. So for me, my biggest battle was myself, which isn't to discount the fact that the world out there doesn't necessarily accept this stuff. But I think, you know, the best that we can do is really be true to ourselves and then do have some faith that the work finds its place in the world, but we can't control that part as much.
I love what both of you said, Stephanie and Lisa, and so thank you for those answers. The only other thing I would add is just to remember that it's we have the tools right now in this moment in time to really build communities outside of the traditional you know, institutions and around the traditional gatekeepers. You know, it's, if you get the recognition and acknowledgement from those sources, it's cool, but you don't need it. You can build a community with like-minded individuals from around the world that's completely outside of those power structures, and do quite well at it. So yeah, just keep that in mind.
Great, thank you. And we are actually at our time. And so just to be, you know, be mindful of people's time, be mindful of being on Zoom for this amount of time, and know that, you know, maybe yeah, there are other things that you have to tend to. And so thank you so much for being here. There's actually a question that there's a couple of questions, you know, that we did not get to as panelists. You know, we're talking about, of course, we talked about Afrofuturism, but thinking about how that links to Black Panther, and thinking about Chadwick Boseman's death. Like, it's coming up on our year, you know, this coming August, and what he gave, what pop culture has given to Afrofuturism, or how, you know, all of a sudden it's like, oh, you know what Afrofuturism is? Okay. Did you know that before Black Panther? Maybe not, but whatever. Now you know, and that's what pop culture kind of does, I think, for us in lifting that knowledge and getting that knowledge out to people, and thinking about you know, how we take that up within Indigenous Futurisms. So I just want to end with this quote. I'm gonna cite my sister here, Karen Recollet, and you know, Karen, I mean, you've seen from this, she's just such a beautiful thinker. I love thinking with her, and writing with her. And so this I just think that this quote just sums up our, you know, our whole conversation, and what we wanted to, I think, intended to give as moderators, and then what we asked of you, inviting you as panelists in. So this is the essence of kinstillatory, like liquid spirit, like the Milky Way, like our ancestral future kin waiting for their descent. Keep dreaming with and about each other as we future ourselves into the galaxy. So I just want to say thank you, panelists. Thank you, audience, for joining us on this journey. Take good care of each other. Take good care of yourselves. And we'll see you again sometime soon.
Thank you so much, everybody. This has really been amazing. I love it. From love letters to Lichen, we've gone all over. It's great. And lots in between. And I'm sorry, I did see a few questions in there. I saw mostly comments, and I was trying to summarize the comments, but the time sort of ran away. But I'm sure that, you know, our panelists are reachable, and I'm sure if there's burning questions or further discussion you want to have, you can reach out to all of them. I don't know if we included their contact information, but they're Googleable. Speaking of language, the power of language and words, Googleable, I don't think that's a word, but anyway. We just have like 3 super quick poll questions. We really appreciate if you could just answer those of you who still stayed around, and there's still quite a few of you. So it's up now. Just how did you hear about this event? Just trying to understand how best to communicate with folks. Wow. Okay. Gotcha. Okay. We can end that now. Thank you. All right. Can we get the next question? Do I have to end polling? Sorry, I don't know how this all works. I'm very untechnical, as everybody who knows me knows. Okay. Well, maybe we only have one question because we don't see, oh, there we go. Okay, so as a result of attending this event, I have a better understanding of what Afro and Indigenous futurisms means. Very subjective question, because of course there's no one definition, but just in your own experience, in your own interpretation.
Should we sign off, Zoe?
No, stay.
Okay. Oh, okay, sorry, okay. Okay.
Sorry.
No.
You're not released yet. It's 5:49. I have you till 6. Technically speaking.
I thought it was just an awkward Zoom moment. So yeah, okay. Here we are.
No, stay.
Okay.
Great. Okay, and then just the last one is, how satisfied were you with this event? I think I know the answer to this judging by the comments that I've seen, but let our speakers and our moderators know how much you appreciated them and hearing their knowledge and experience. And okay, so thank you so much for answering the poll questions. I really want to thank the panelists so much and the moderators so much. This is really super rich. I never thought I would be Googling Lichen, which I've seen a lot of times, having gone up to see the Canadian Shield and been up north a lot, but it was cool to see it again. And I love the idea of the love letter. And today I was listening to something on CBC about writing, or last night about writing, like the act of writing, and how that's so revolutionary, and how, you know, we should start thinking, start small, you know, write a postcard to yourself, mail it off, things like that. Postcards, if you can even find those things anymore, but just this power of language. And so I love the idea of the love letter. And then finally, just want to let you know about I Am My Ancestors' Wildest Dream, which is an event that's coming up tomorrow. Lots of good stuff happening there. It's on our website. Feel free to check that out. And our final event on Friday for Black Futures Month. We'll be doing lots more Black Futures programming, but just for this month, there is an event on the 26th. So Friday, featuring lots of great speakers, spoken word artists, etc. So again, thank you, panel, and thank you all the people who are around. It's 5:51. I said I would get you some found time, and I got you 9 minutes of found time. So go enjoy your evenings and take care, everybody.